The train rattled through the darkness, its rhythmic clatter echoing through the empty compartments. Outside, the night pressed in like a thick curtain, obscuring the world beyond. Inside, a handful of passengers sat in silence, their faces illuminated only by the dim glow of their devices. Among them was Sarah, a young woman traveling alone. She had boarded the train reluctantly, her nerves already on edge from a long day of travel. But as the hours passed and the train plunged deeper into the night, a growing sense of unease settled over her. She tried to shake off the feeling, burying herself in her book and pretending not to notice the occasional flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. But each time she looked up, the sensation lingered, like someone, or something, was watching her from the shadows. As the train rumbled on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced around the compartment, but the other passengers seemed lost in their own worlds, oblivious to her growing discomfort. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered and died, plunging the compartment into darkness. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as she groped for her phone, the only source of light in the pitch-black carriage. But before she could find it, a cold hand clamped down on her shoulder, sending a shiver down her spine. She froze, unable to move as a voice whispered in her ear, "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah." Terror seized her, paralyzing her as she struggled to break free. But the hand only tightened its grip, its icy fingers sending tendrils of fear creeping through her veins. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand released her, and the lights flickered back to life. Sarah looked around wildly, but there was no sign of her mysterious assailant. She was alone once more, the other passengers still lost in their own worlds. Shaken but determined not to give in to her fear, Sarah forced herself to calm down. It was just her imagination, she told herself, playing tricks on her in the darkness. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. As the train continued its journey through the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the carriage, every whisper of the wind seemed to taunt her, reminding her of the darkness that lurked just beyond the reach of the light. Then, just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, the train began to slow, its brakes screeching in protest as it ground to a halt. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she peered out into the night, searching for any sign of what had caused the sudden stop. But all she could see was darkness, stretching out into infinity. And then, from somewhere in the depths of the night, she heard it, a faint, unearthly wail that sent chills down her spine. As the sound grew louder, Sarah felt a presence in the darkness, something ancient and malevolent stirring in the shadows. She wanted to scream, to run as far away as she could, but her body refused to move, paralyzed by fear. And then, with a suddenness that took her breath away, the carriage door swung open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the darkness. It was a conductor, his face hidden beneath the brim of his cap, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "Tickets, please," he said, his voice like the rustle of leaves on a cold winter's night. But there was something in his tone, something that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. With trembling hands, she fumbled for her ticket, desperate to get away from this place, this creature that seemed to have stepped straight out of her worst nightmares. But as she handed it over, she saw something in the conductor's eyes, something that made her blood run cold. "Enjoy your journey, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with malice. And then, with a flicker of movement, he was gone, disappearing back into the darkness, as if he had never been there at all. As the train lurched back to life, Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the encounter. What had just happened? Was it all just a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination? Or had she stumbled upon something far more sinister, something that lurked in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim? She didn't know, and as the train sped on through the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was out there, waiting for its chance to strike. And as the darkness closed in around her, she knew that her journey was far from over. The train sliced through the night, its wheels clacking rhythmically against the tracks like the steady beat of a heart. Inside carriage 13, only a few passengers dared to travel. Among them was Mark, a skeptical journalist on assignment to debunk supernatural stories. Little did he know, he was about to face the most terrifying ordeal of his life. The journey began uneventfully enough. Mark settled into his seat, armed with his laptop and a healthy dose of skepticism. He chuckled at the thought of the superstitions surrounding the train, rumors of hauntings and strange occurrences that had plagued Carriage 13 for decades. Ghost stories, he thought, nothing more than fanciful tales spun by bored travelers. As the train hurtled deeper into the night, Mark's skepticism waned. Strange noises echoed through the carriage, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He dismissed them as the creaks and groans of an old train, nothing more. But then the lights flickered and died, plunging Carriage 13 into darkness. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he groped for his phone, the only source of light in the pitch-black compartment. But before he could turn it on, he heard a voice. A woman's voice, whispering in his ear. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. "Please, you have to help me." Mark froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He wanted to run, to flee from whatever unseen horror lurked in the darkness. But something held him in place, a nagging curiosity that refused to be ignored. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I am trapped," the voice replied, its tone filled with desperation. Trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Mark's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of prank, a trick played by one of his fellow passengers? Or was there something more sinister at work, something beyond his understanding? Before he could ponder further, the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the carriage once more. But the voice was gone, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts and a growing sense of unease. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark began to investigate. He questioned the other passengers, searched every inch of Carriage 13 for clues, but found nothing. It was as if the voice had never existed, a figment of his imagination born from the darkness of the night. But just as he was about to give up hope, Mark stumbled upon a clue. A faded photograph tucked away in a forgotten corner of the carriage. It was a picture of a woman, her face hauntingly familiar, her eyes filled with sorrow. As he studied the photograph, chill ran down Mark's spine. He knew then that the voice he had heard belonged to her, that she was the one trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. Determined to help her, Mark delved deeper into her story, uncovering a tale of tragedy and loss that stretched back decades. He learned of a terrible accident that had claimed the lives of dozens of passengers, of a woman who had perished in the wreckage, her spirit condemned to wander the earth for all eternity. Armed with this knowledge, Mark set out to free her from her torment. He gathered the other passengers, told them the woman's story, and together they performed a ritual to release her spirit from its earthly bonds. And as the train rolled on through the night, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him, knowing that he had helped a lost soul find its way home. For in the darkness of Carriage 13, he had found not only fear, but also compassion and understanding, a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his days. The train rattled along the tracks, cutting through the desolate landscape like a silver serpent in the night. Among its passengers was Alex, a seasoned traveler with a taste for adventure. Little did he know, this journey would test his courage in ways he could never have imagined. As the train barreled through the darkness, Alex found himself drawn to the tales of its haunted past, stories of phantom passengers who would appear and disappear without a trace, leaving nothing behind but a chill in the air and a sense of unease. But Alex was undeterred by such superstitions. He relished the thrill of the unknown, the possibility of encountering something beyond the realm of reason. So when the lights flickered and died, plunging the carriage into darkness, he welcomed the opportunity to uncover the truth. Armed with nothing but his curiosity, Alex set out to explore the train, determined to uncover the source of its mysterious hauntings. He searched every compartment, every nook and cranny, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as he was about to give up hope, Alex stumbled upon a door he hadn't noticed before. A door that seemed to lead to nowhere. Intrigued, he turned the handle and stepped inside, only to find himself in a forgotten carriage hidden away from prying eyes. The air was thick with dust, the silence oppressive as Alex made his way through the abandoned carriage. But just as he was about to turn back, he heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the darkness, coming closer with each passing moment. Heart pounding, Alex followed the sound, his senses on high alert as he crept through the gloom. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the footsteps ceased, leaving him alone in the darkness once more. But Alex knew he was not alone. He could feel it in the air. Presence lurking just beyond the reach of his senses. With a trembling hand, he reached out into the darkness, his fingers brushing against something cold and solid, a handrail leading down into the depths below. Summoning his courage, Alex descended into the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of his phone. As he reached the bottom, he found himself in a hidden chamber, its walls lined with ancient symbols and strange markings. But before he could investigate further, he heard a voice, a woman's voice, calling out to him from the shadows. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. "Please, you have to help me." Driven by a sense of duty, Alex followed the sound of her voice, his heart pounding in his chest as he navigated the labyrinthine passages of the hidden carriage. And then, at last, he found her, a young woman trapped in a web of darkness, her eyes wide with terror. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex rushed to her side, breaking through the barrier that held her captive. And as he did, the darkness began to recede, replaced by the warm glow of sunlight streaming in through the windows. As the woman emerged into the light, Alex saw the gratitude in her eyes, felt the weight of her burden lifted from his shoulders. For in that moment, he had not only saved her from the darkness, but had also unlocked the secrets of the haunted train, a testament to the power of courage and compassion in the face of the unknown. The train station was a relic of a forgotten era, its weathered timbers groaning under the weight of time. It stood on the edge of town, a silent sentinel watching over the passage of days. Few dared to venture near, for it was said that the station was cursed, haunted by the ghosts of those who had passed through its doors. Among the townsfolk, there were whispers of strange happenings at the station, of phantom trains that arrived in the dead of night, their passengers never to be seen again. But for Emily, a young woman with a thirst for adventure, the station held an irresistible allure. One moonlit night, Emily made her way to the station, drawn by the promise of the unknown. The air was thick with anticipation as she approached, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty platform. As she entered the station, Emily felt a chill run down her spine, a sensation that seemed to seep into her bones, filling her with a sense of foreboding. But she pressed on, her curiosity driving her forward into the heart of the darkness. The station was deserted, its once bustling halls now silent and still. Emily wandered through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing off the walls like whispers in the night. And then, just as she was about to give up hope, she heard it, the distant rumble of an approaching train. Heart pounding, Emily followed the sound, her pulse quickening with each step. And then, with a suddenness that took her breath away, the train emerged from the shadows. The ghostly apparition wreathed in mist and moonlight. As it drew nearer, Emily could see figures moving inside the carriages, shadowy forms that seemed to flicker and fade with each passing moment. She hesitated for a moment, her fear warring with her curiosity. But in the end, it was the lure of the unknown that won out. With a trembling hand, Emily boarded the train, her heart racing with excitement and apprehension. The carriage was empty, its seats worn and faded with age. She took a seat by the window, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape as the train hurtled on into the night. But as the hours passed and the darkness deepened, Emily began to feel a sense of unease creeping over her. The train seemed to be traveling to nowhere, its destination unknown to her. And with each passing moment, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, like unseen eyes boring into her soul. Just when Emily thought she couldn't take it anymore, the train began to slow, its brakes screeching in protest as it ground to a halt. Outside, the darkness pressed in like a suffocating blanket, obscuring the world beyond. Heart pounding, Emily rose from her seat and made her way to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. But before she could open it, a voice spoke from the darkness, a voice filled with sorrow and longing. "Do not be afraid," it said, its tone like a soft caress on the wind. "You are not alone." Emily's blood ran cold as she turned to face the source of the voice, a figure cloaked in shadow, its features obscured by darkness. She wanted to run, to flee from this place of nightmares, but something held her in place. A sense of curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper still. With a trembling voice, Emily asked the figure who they were and why they had brought her here. But before they could reply, the train lurched back to life, hurtling forward into the darkness once more. As the train raced on through the night, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, she knew that this was not the end of her journey, but only the beginning of a new adventure, one that would take her to places she had never dared to dream of before. The train station stood silent and desolate under the veil of night, its platforms empty save for the occasional flicker of a dimly lit bulb. As the wind whispered through the abandoned corridors, it carried with it a sense of foreboding, a warning to any who dared to tread its lonely paths. Among those who ventured into the station that night was David, a seasoned traveler with a penchant for adventure. He had heard the rumors surrounding the old railway line that cut through the heart of the countryside, tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained disappearances. But David was not one to be swayed by superstition. With a steely resolve and a thirst for the unknown, he boarded the last train of the evening, eager to uncover the truth behind the stories. As the train pulled out of the station, David found himself alone in the carriage, the only sound the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels against the tracks. He settled into his seat by the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside as the train hurtled onwards into the night. But as the miles slipped away and the hours passed, David began to sense that he was not alone. It started as a subtle feeling, a prickling at the back of his neck, but soon grew into a full-blown sensation of being watched. He glanced around the carriage, but there was no one to be seen. The only other occupants were his own shadowy reflection and the flickering lights overhead. Yet despite the emptiness, David could not shake the feeling of a presence lurking just out of sight. With a nervous laugh, he tried to dismiss his fears as mere paranoia. But as the train plunged into a tunnel, enveloping the carriage in darkness, David's heart began to race. He could feel eyes boring into him from all sides, unseen and malevolent. Desperate for some form of distraction, David reached for his phone, but to his dismay, it was dead. He cursed under his breath, his fingers trembling as he searched for some other source of light. But before he could find one, the train emerged from the tunnel, and David was plunged once more into the dim glow of the carriage. As he sat there in the darkness, David became acutely aware of a presence sitting opposite him. He could feel the weight of someone's gaze upon him, heavy and unrelenting. With a sense of dread creeping over him, he forced himself to look up, half expecting to see some spectral figure staring back at him. But there was nothing there. The seat opposite him was empty, its surface cold and unyielding. David shook his head, chiding himself for his foolishness. But the feeling of being watched persisted. As the train rattled on through the night, David's nerves began to fray. Every creak of the carriage, every gust of wind seemed to set his teeth on edge. He felt as though he were trapped in some twisted nightmare, with no means of escape. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the feeling of being watched vanished. David let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Perhaps it had all been in his mind, trick of the imagination brought on by the late hour and the empty carriage. But as the train pulled into its final destination, David's sense of unease returned with a vengeance. He stepped out onto the platform, his eyes scanning the deserted station for any sign of life. But there was no one to be seen, save for the station master, who regarded him with a curious expression. "Did you see anyone else on the train?" David asked, his voice trembling slightly. The station master shook his head. "No, sir, you were the only passenger aboard." With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, David thanked the station master and made his way out of the station. As he walked through the empty streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that unseen eyes were watching his every move. And as he glanced back at the station one last time, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing on the platform, watching him with cold, unblinking eyes. But when he blinked, it was gone, leaving David alone in the darkness once more.